Alphonse Elric has come to War of the Visions, and he's ready to punch his way into your heart. Wait, that doesn't sound right. Alphonse is a 90 cost lightning unit in the vein of Snow from Final Fantasy 13, where he uses innate hate to tank for your party and keep the rest of your formation safe. So the main question is he as good as Snow was, and is he worth pulling on now? Let's talk about it. Just a quick note, I'm not doing an AI test in this video because I just couldn't find Alphonses to borrow in the JP server. I guess it's just maybe the friends that I have or whatever it is, but I can't find Alphonse. I can't do the AI test until I can get my hands on him myself, and maybe I'll do that in about a week when I pull for him along with Roy Mustang. Let's talk about Alphonse's stats. They're pretty good. His HP is the 4th highest in the game at 6,245. He's got 36 defense total when you include that you're going to put his passive on, and then his agility is at 64, which is kind of middling, but he has a passive for that, which can go up to 70. He also can go up to a maximum of 4 move and 3 jump if you'd like him to. So a very mobile unit, which is great for a tank to be able to alter how they kind of move across the map, which in turn alters the way that your enemies move across the map because your tank has hate. He does have some low stats, however. We can talk about his attack stat, which is only 373. There's a 24% buff on his passive, and he gets a 50% buff from his limit burst, only for the attack though. And he gets another 30% from the equipment that we can craft for him. But really, at the end of the day, his job isn't to actually deal damage, it's to tank for your party. And he will deal a little bit of damage because similar to Snow, he's attacking with the strike attack type, which people are generally weak to or don't protect against. But at the end of the day, without a lot of defense penetration, without a lot of attack, he's not going to be a very strong unit. We can also talk about his accuracy, which is only at 152%. He does have 100% hit attack, which has 4 uses, which is very relevant in my eyes, you know, compared to Snow, who has a 100% hit attack with 3 uses, which runs out pretty easily. This gives you that extra attack, which can make a big difference in guild battle. Alphonse also has very good resistances. We have the high slash and pierce resistance, which is at 20% innately, but only goes higher through his buffs and through the various equipment and vision cards that you can put on him. He can really achieve very high slash and pierce resistances. He also has positive magic and missile resistances and is weak to strike, which is fine because a lot of units are, but also not fine because there's going to be a ton of strike in the meta coming up here. So really you're looking to take on these slash and pierce teams, which kind of fits into fighting against wind teams, but also fighting against dark teams, because we actually do see quite a few slash dark teams, particularly Sephiroth, obviously, and this will be one way you can combat against him. But again, there are lots of other pierce options too. Like, for example, we have the Sorrow unit in Fire, who has a lot of pierce attacks and a lot of slash attacks. So I think that Alphonse is coming into a really good spot in the meta to take on a lot of different units, and that's not a surprise. So normally I go through pros and cons of a unit, and instead I'm going to kind of cover it by comparing Alphonse to Snow. And through doing so, we'll cover all of the different things he adds via utility and via tanking and stuff. So first, we'll do a comparison sheet here. We have Alphonse, Snow, and Esther. And I put Esther in here because she's also a lightning unit that can tank, although it's harder to make her do that than it is for Alphonse. But also, she is specifically strong against slash and pierce. She's very weak to magic. She's a lot easier to take out that way, but it is something, you know, that we could look at and we can compare them also. When we look at this, we can see there's a clear hierarchy in terms of HP, and the same could be said in the opposite direction for the attack stat. And otherwise, we're really looking at what is some very good tank stats and resistances for all 3 characters. Particularly Alphonse and Snow are very similar in the majority of their stats, and that isn't a surprise considering that they're both these main job strike jobs that have been created similar, but they both have the ninja sub job as well. Really, with Alphonse versus Snow, you're trading you know, your weakness to be strike compared to being weak to magic. Although, you know, Snow doesn't really have a lot of strike resistance either. But when we look down at Esther, we can kind of see that she's a bit faster. She's obviously got way more attack, but she is going to drop off in some of those tanking capabilities. And really the main thing is the lack of innate hate. That really does make a huge difference with a tank, to be able to alter people's movement straight from the start, but also not being dependent on a high AP attack like Taunting Blade to be able to draw people to you. There's a lot of AI considerations that go into which attack a unit is going to use. So being able or having to like bank on Esther using Taunting Blade is just not reliable. So I really don't think she should be compared to Alphonse and Snow, but I just wanted to put that in there since I have seen people bring it up. It's worth mentioning that she is in that similar area in terms of resistances as a physical tank as well. So now let's look specifically at the comparison between Snow and Alphonse. Like I said, their stats are largely the same. So where do they differ? Well, first of all, they do both have 10 innate hate, but with the Alphonse, he actually has to equip his own equipment to be able to get that. And his equipment is good. It gives him that spirit and defense break resistance when his HP is above 70%. Now that actually gives everybody that effect if you wanted to give that to a tank. But where it kind of hamstrings him a bit is that you have one less slot to play with, and that is kind of a big deal. So Snow just gets the 10 innate hate and Alphonse has to equip something, and there's just no negotiation there. Now, can you get by with just 5 innate hate? You could, but I think for the most part, most teams that you put him in, you're just going to want all 10. It's going to be important to have that. We can also look at Alphonse and his single target resist and AoE resistances compared to Snow, and we can see 15 single target innate. That is from his Transcendence. Now, Snow doesn't have a Transcendence yet, but he is going to get one in a sec here in JP, and he gets something, he gets increased survivability as well. So really, it's hard to compare those two things, but we can for global specifically. And right now in global, Snow doesn't have that. So that's just something to consider. The 12 AoE resistance for Alphonse comes from the Knight passive, and you might not equip that. What really is important here is they both have 20 AoE resistance buffs that they can apply to themselves. Alphonse has a 30% all damage reduction counter, whereas Snow has no damage reduction counter. And Alphonse has this new thing that is this elemental chain resistance. And what this means is that when Alphonse is being chained down by, let's say, a fire team that is using a 3-hit skill from Yuffie, and then Sorrow comes in with a massive strike of ruin, it's not going to deal as much damage to Alphonse. I think this is sneaky one of the best parts of his entire kit. We obviously don't have the numbers on how effective this is. I think JB79 is going to be looking into that for us and doing some testing, but it's a big deal. This could be absolutely key to him being a massive tank in the meta right now. Now, they both have defense spirit buffs that they can apply. What's interesting about Alphonse's buff is that it's on an attack, whereas Snow is on a TP skill, and there's really no guarantee Snow gets that because really Snow needs to use his self heal and his courage first, and oftentimes he doesn't get to that defense spirit buff, whereas Alphonse has it on a pierce attack, which is good and bad. It means that with somebody weak to pierce, he's going to use it more likely, but when they're weaker to strike, he probably won't use it. The range on it is also quite bad, so it's not a given that he's going to have that 30 defense and spirit up. One of the big comparisons here too is the courage or lack thereof on Alphonse. He doesn't have courage. He doesn't have that below 20% or below 50% self-heal that Snow and King Mont has. He doesn't have those things, and those are really important things to have for a tank. Now, he can get by without it. There is courage removal and all, but I think that kind of is the biggest thing that separates Alphonse from Snow, is that Snow has that courage, and against most teams, that's going to be just all the time makes Snow better than Alphonse is. Now, against certain teams, like the dark teams right now, like the fire teams right now with Sorrow, maybe against now the wind teams, because wind will attack into Alphonse but wouldn't attack into Snow, there is courage removal, so it's not as big a deal, I think, with today's meta. But down the road and against certain matchups, it is important to have that courage, and it is a big demerit towards Alphonse for not having it. Now, Alphonse does have a self heal. It's on his Job 25 skill. It's a skill he's going to use a lot, so he will be healing a little bit as he goes, but the fact that he can't just get that automatic heal again is a big deal. The automatic heal is huge because it heals not on your turn. It heals when you almost die, but then don't die. Alphonse has to take another turn in order to use his self-heal. If you pair it with his TMR, he can get even more healing, but that's just too long. That's too late to actually make a difference in a lot of matchups. Maybe this is where the chain resistance comes in handy, because maybe Snow gets chained and he gets healed back up, but there's still a big chain count on him and he can be killed easily. We'll have to see, but to not have those two things is a massive drop off from where Snow is. And we can see that Alphonse has other things that Snow doesn't, but we have to hope that that makes up for not having those two specific buffs. So like I said, Alphonse has the spirit and defense break resistance. It means you can't imperil his defense and spirit as long as his HP is above 70%. It's going to be there a lot of the time, so it's a good thing, you know, to have. He also has a barrier, a physical barrier. Now that's not going to help him against the fire teams, the wind and the dark teams, but it is going to help against a lot of other teams and against a lot of specific units. Now, if you're coming up against a Sephiroth and he uses his limit burst first, that's going to not go through his barrier, right? That's going to have a reduction on there. So that is, you know, the kind of the setups that you can include. If you have your team in an AoE, maybe they have lots of AoE resistance, Alphonse is going to be able to, you know, prompt certain attacks from your opponent and then maybe get some use out of that barrier. But when we switch over to the utility side of things, this is where Alphonse takes a step up above Snow. Snow's main thing is that he has that full dispel on the 100% hit. Because it's such a good attack, he uses it all up very quickly in matches, and it's often not there for those second or third guild battle matches. He also has a 30% single target imperil, which is good for PvE. We're not really too worried about it in PvP, but when we go look at Alphonse here, Alphonse comes in with a lot of things to help your team out. So Dispel Protect, that just goes across all of his skills. He has a barrier break that does an attack and agility break that does a counter chance reduction of 100%. When we're talking about taking on a Sephiroth specifically, you're breaking Sephiroth's barrier, you're reducing his agility so he doesn't go as often, you're getting a bit of an attack break, but also he can't use his scintilla on you because you've just reduced his counter chance by 100%. He also has crit evasion reduction, so that's really strong for lightning specifically, because we have lightning the unit and we have Esther the unit. We have a lot of crit units in the lightning family. We've got Cloud, we've got Frederica, there's more. So really this is such a good piece of utility for him to be able to use. I believe that's on his sub kit though. He can even dispel his own debuffs, which is certainly useful. So really I see Alphonse having greater utility than Snow, and he even has AP break on his night sub job, which is really fun for manual play. One final point to compare with these units are their limit bursts, and I think they both have very strong limit bursts. Now you don't really see Snow use his limit burst that much because he has a lot of other good skills that he's using, particularly the Dispel is just so strong and the 100% hit is very relevant. But when we look at Alphonse's limit burst and it inflicts slow on an opponent, that is something that can seriously change the course of a match, as can the stun from from Snow's limit burst. But what we're often looking at with these tanks is that they don't have that much AP stored up, so it's not always the wisest thing for them to use. If you want them to be just using AP skills every turn, they can't necessarily afford to use their limit burst. But if you can find a way for Alphonse to be using his limit burst and not hamstring him for the rest of the match in terms of his attacks, then it's going to be 100% worth it, because it does so much for your team to be able to take someone out of the match and make them slower than the rest of your team. Maybe you can lap them. That's just a big deal. So definitely something that I will be experimenting with. It is important to talk a little bit about the cons for Alphonse, and there's not too many, but he does have very low range. He does have no courage, no self heal that's like an auto one, your classic auto potion, and he's weak to magic. I know he has a positive resistance to magic, but he's weak to magic. There's no spirit, there's no high magic resistance. He has physical barriers. Really, when you come up against a team with a dedicated magic caster, they will be the ones that will peel through a lot of what Alphonse is doing and be able to damage him. So while I think he is in the same vein as Snow, I have a hard time seeing if he's going to be quite as good because of the lack of certain characteristics, mainly the courage and the auto heal. But what he can kind of make up for is the higher HP. It is the chain resistance. I think that there is very much a place for Alphonse in our meta. Okay, so let's talk about some of these specific equipment that we're going to be looking at with Alphonse. So there's Al's chalk case, which we can farm and craft. And I think there's a really interesting shield version that you would make. And for new players, this should just be good to put on all of your tanks because it's an accessory and it has 15% HP and it has the defense and spirit debuff resistance 100% for your units. So that's all really good for a new player, but then, you know, for an experienced player, you might not use this as much unless we're seeing a lot of defense or spirit breaks in the meta. So what this really is good for is for Alphonse. It gives him some more attack and it gives him that 5 more innate hate. This thing's got to be on him for the most part, and that's okay. So it's a good thing to craft. You could technically make a couple of them, but really just making a shield version for Alphonse will be the way to go. We can also look at Alphonse TMR. It's the Al's shoulder spike. This is interesting because it's got 616 HP. It's a lot of HP. It's got defense and spirit and some crit evade. And the ability is a 2-use team buff, which gives 40% attack and 20% absorption of damage done for 3 turns for allies. Now, I really like this ability. I think it could be a really fun ability to use in a lot of physical teams that want that attack boost as well. But, you know, the absorption can be taken or used by any type of damage dealer. So looks pretty good. The downside here is that it's an armor type. It means you can't put other armor on. Now for Alphonse, that's not a deal breaker because you can put this onto his TMR slot and you can still use the chalk case and then equip a fist if you want him to do more damage. However, you might actually be using you know, another piece of armor and no weapon and just going for full tankiness, maybe 2 accessories and an armor. There's some options to put this on some other damage dealers, like anybody that you would keen blade with could also use Al's shoulder spike for the ability, but really that's going to be very specific parties that you've tested with, and that's why you're using it. It's a fun TMR. It's just hard to use because of that armor tag. We can also talk about the vision card that came out, and this is the Believers in the Bonds of Brotherhood. I think it's a really, really good vision card, as these collab vision cards often are. The ability on the party effect of agility 18%, single target resistance 16, and then strike attack 35. Is just so good. Like, it's absolutely insane. And the fact that they put single target resistance 10 on this for Alphonse and for Edward, and then some HP as well, and the unit effects just continue to boost the slash and pierce resistance of those units. It's really solid. There's even defense on the card itself. This absolutely pushes Alphonse up another level to get even more single target resistance, makes him more viable as a tank. It's a no-brainer. If you're going into strike teams, then I think that you really, really want to pull for this. Actually, you know what, to be honest, if you're going into mace or pierce teams as well as strike teams, like if you're going for any of those teams, then you pull for this card. Undoubtedly, you have to do it. And if you're not going to be building any of those job types for sure, then you would skip this. It's really hard to skip though. It's a very good VC. It's very strong. And I know there's a lot coming up right now, so it's tough to consider skipping this, but I might be one of those people just because I am not planning on any of these jobs as a type that I want to build. Oh, and sorry, I said mace just now, but I meant to say staff, the green mage kind of category. That's my bad. It's not mace. So the question now is, should you pull for Alphonse Elric? And I think there are some situations where you do pull for him. For example, if you were planning on building a fist team, then I think you really should pull for him. I think that he's going to work with a ton of different fist units. You don't even have to use his brother, although I think they go very well together. What I'm thinking though is that any team does like to have that innate hate, that person that can really affect the AI of your opponent, and he's just perfect for the job. Now, if you have Snow, you could use him instead, and that might save you some Visior, but I think Alphonse does bring quite a bit of really good things to the team in order to support his teammates with the barrier break, with the protect, dispel. So he's worth in his own right, you know, making a kind of a splash into this meta. Specifically, I think this is the meta with all the courage removal where his bonuses over Snow really make a big difference. And in the future, Snow might actually have his time to shine again, but you know, we'll kind of see about that. The other party that I think Alphonse would work really well in is pretty obvious, and that is going to be the Mono Lightning teams. It's going to give the Mono Lightning players a physical tank, whereas we were just just using Charlotte as kind of a magic tank for sure, but you know, sometimes a kind of a pseudo physical tank. Some people were using Esther in that role, and she still can be used with Alphonse as well. But I think, you know, you really can't beat the luxury that the innate hate provides. So if you're one of those two players, fist players or the lightning mono element players, then Alphonse is a good choice for you. And if you're not into those things, then he's probably not as good a choice for you. But if you like Alphonse, then you should pull for him, because this is what the game's about, playing with the characters you like, and Full Metal Alchemist is awesome. So I can't really criticize anybody that goes for him anyway. I'm personally really stuck on whether to go for him or not, because my Visior is kind of low. So well, sorry, it's not that low, but I'm going to be going for Roy Mustang next week. So I kind of have to balance whether I wait till Roy comes out, pull on his banner, pull for his vision card, see how that goes. And if I'm in a really good spot, then I'll go for Alphonse, but I'm not going to be pulling for him this week. I'm going to be patient. The collab runs for quite a while, so I'm not going to rush anything. I'll just wait and I'll bide my time, and I'll, let's face it, probably get Alphonse anyway, but it isn't the element that I like, so it seems like a good choice to me.